Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 10th episode of Comic DNA. I am Aaron Walther, and with me, as always, is Luke Thompson Moritz.
Thank you very much. Hello.
So, in today's episode, we are going to be talking about Deadpool number 11. That's the first volume of the series, Deadpool number 11. Written by Joe Kelly, penciled by Pete Woods, and published in 1997 by Marvel Comics. So, it's always kind of been my opinion that Deadpool is kind of a divisive character among fans.
It's a pretty good assumption.
Yeah, I always like to say that I love Deadpool as much as I hate him.
Yep, I like a very specific Deadpool.
Yeah. Typically considered a dark comedy kind of character, there have been some really great, truly funny comics written about Deadpool. But he also, this is one of them. A lot of Joe Kelly's, actually, I would say count.
Okay.
But there's also kind of, the character also kind of represents a lot of the shallower aspects of superhero comics. And it's really easy to do really cheap, super violent, quote, edgy comics where Deadpool just makes a bunch of pop culture references and breaks the fourth wall.
A bunch of stuff.
Yeah, and then just like acknowledges how violent and edgy he is.
They know it's going to sell copies.
Yeah. So, and the fact that he was created by Rob Liefeld doesn't really help the character get away from that trashy excess stereotype that is typical.
Not even a little bit.
Yeah, very typical of Liefeld's comics.
Yes.
In many readers' eyes.
It's basically that, pouches, and then the black and red color scheme.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. But like I say, there have been a good number of funny comics, which is sort of an anomaly. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but it is sort of an anomaly because Marvel and DC to an even greater extent, they really don't do a lot of comedy comics. Like, there are jokes in books every now and then, but very few of them are, like, really funny. Right. And when they try to be comedic, I think the comedy falls flat more often than not.
It feels forced.
Like, yeah, there's a lot of time it feels forced.
Yeah, like in this book specifically, it's like, it feels really, for being such a weird and obscene subject matter, it's really, it feels organic. Like, if I knew Deadpool, it feels like, this makes sense.
Yeah, I'm just going to go on record and say that this is the funniest issue of Deadpool ever written. Like, I'm not going to turn this into a generational thing, but I'm sure there are a lot of kids who are reading Deadpool and they really like whatever, like, recent Deadpool thing that has come out, and they haven't read a comic from 20 years ago, and they don't have any interest in it. But I'm telling you now, you're all wrong. This is the funniest Deadpool comic ever written.
This is easily the funniest Deadpool material I've ever had. I've ever been exposed to.
Yeah. And you haven't read a lot of comics, Deadpool comics, correct?
Yeah, like, I had a friend that was really into Deadpool, so I kind of read his secondhand comics to a degree. He'd like we'd go to a bookstore, he'd get a big Deadpool trade paperback, and it's like, I'd read that, and I go, okay, this is okay. I like the character enough. But this was my first, like, seeing what he could really do sort of thing, seeing his true potential, I guess. So...
Yeah, part of what makes this Deadpool series, this first volume, like, really interesting is kind of the time period that it was created in. It was...
Well, I think it's 97, right?
Well, it was first published in 97, yeah.
Okay.
So that was, like, right at the complete low of the comic book industry. Marvel was about to declare bankruptcy because a guy bought the company in the early 90s and just completely mismanaged it and, like, completely gutted it. The company, like, comics, the industry as a whole was still suffering from the big speculator bubble bursting in the early 90s. Basically, like, a little bit of comics history for you. Comics got, like, really, really popular in the late 80s and early 90s. Those of you who are, like, interested in history or of collecting things and hobbies, you'll also remember that baseball cards were huge in, like,
I grew up right at the tail end of that.
Like 91, 92, 93, baseball cards were huge, and comics were huge too. And then basically, you had the X-Men series printing off like 1 million copies, and everybody's making millions of dollars. Like, Rob Liefeld became a millionaire drawing comics. Like that.
Right.
That just, like, doesn't happen nowadays. You don't just become a millionaire drawing comics. And part of that was driven by the speculators. Everybody, when in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s, everybody saw that all these old comics that their parents threw away in the 60s now were suddenly worth lots of money. People were spending thousands and thousands of dollars for a copy of Amazing Spider-Man #1. So what happens in the 90s is everybody says, well, I've got my new Wildcats series or my new Youngblood series. Buy the #1, it'll be worth thousands and thousands of dollars someday.
Right.
The problem with that is that in order to capitalize on all the people that wanted to sell their copy of Wildcats or Youngblood #1 for thousands and thousands of dollars, they had to print off millions and millions of copies of the comic. And the only reason Amazing Spider-Man #1 is worth thousands and thousands of dollars, aside from the fact that it is like the cultural relevance of Spider-Man has entered the pop culture, aside from that, it is also a really rare comic. Like they were just not printed or they weren't kept. They were disposable. That's what I should say. They did print high volumes of these comics, but they were disposable. Kids would read them and throw them away.
Because they were cheap.
Yeah, exactly.
Even back then, they were still pretty cheap. Right?
No, they were cheap. It was cheap. It was cheap entertainment. So that's part of why these comics were worth a lot, because there are collectors out there who would read a Spider-Man and say, this is the 90s. This was before things were getting collected into special edition books, like your trade paperbacks, and now we have everything being reprinted digitally. So that's ruining the speculator market even more. But the 1993 was like that magic time where like you couldn't read these old comics anywhere else, unless Marvel occasionally they'd put out like reprints, like they did that with the X-Men. They had like an X-Men Classics line where they would just reprint old issues, and that was the only way to read the old comics if you weren't buying the actual old comics. So
nowadays it's either available digitally or in a big collection.
Yeah, you can get them, you can find them easily. But so the point of all this is there was a huge bust. And like lots of, I forget how many comic book stores, but there was like in like 1 year there was like six, I don't know, a couple of thousand comic book stores in America, and then like the next year there was like 700. Like it just dropped. Geez. Yeah, like everybody went out of business because like these retailers were buying comics for the speculators, and they were saying everybody wants this Spawn issue, so I'm going to buy hundreds of copies of it, and then suddenly everybody stopped buying. Exactly, everybody stopped buying Spawn because they realized Spawn is not going to be worth thousands and thousands of dollars because you can get it anywhere, and that's the whole like the double-edged sword of speculation like that. When people try to fill the demand, they also ruin the speculative value of it. Yep. So it's a
vicious circle.
This book was first put out in 1997, which was like, it wasn't just a low point financially for Marvel. It was also, I would say, a very, very low point creatively. All of the Image guys had left in 93 to form Image Comics, and Marvel for the rest of the decade were pretty much stuck with either second tier talent or just the guys that were just like really loyal to Marvel, or like older creators. But like they were trying to compete with Image Comics, so they were still trying to make like edgy, flashy comics for kids. Right. And Marvel really didn't know how to make comics for kids. And I like in the 90s, it was a mess. The X books were a mess. The Spider-Man books were a mess. This was before Avengers was even popular. Avengers was probably worse off than all of them. And this little Deadpool book was put out, and I think part of what makes this book really, really fun and really interesting is that everybody just assumed it was going to get canceled like right away. Like this book is never going to last. It's about a Rob Liefeld character, which like so
this was our generally unestablished Deadpool, right? Like
this is like before, like Deadpool had just showed up as a villain in like X-Force a few times, and he had 2 miniseries at this point. But they were considered just like X-Men spin-off books. Okay. And X-Men as a franchise was tanking. It was going down because X-Men had, again, with the big boom, X-Men was huge in the early 90s, and then it bust because all the creators left. Right. And so there was just a really awkward time for comic books. But this Deadpool book came out, and it really did a good job of kind of separating itself from the X-Men line and just being its own thing. Just this weird, weird, wacky kind of a book. It had a really good sense of humor.
I mean, like, I already noticed just from the cover alone that this book was gonna be fun. It was the Spider-Man mock cover.
Yeah. This issue itself is the famous parody of Amazing Fantasy number 15, the first appearance of Spider-Man, with Deadpool in place of Spider-Man, and he's carrying Weasel, who is Deadpool's like little sidekick in the book. We will get into that. And he's swinging from a rope, and the rope is snapping, and it's a parody of Spider-Man. And there's also a reason why they're parodying Spider-Man in this issue, which we'll get into when we get into the specifics of the book. But yeah, so historically, this book was kind of a shock to everybody. It just kind of kept consistently performing well, and it had like a strong, dedicated fan base, which was really interesting at a time when most books were losing their fans left and right. The Spider-Man books were going through their Clone Saga nonsense, which I mean, that, like, not to get too personal, but like the Spider-Man Clone Saga was the storyline that caused me to quit reading comics forever. Fortunately, really? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Fortunately, Forever only lasted about 4 years, maybe 2 years, really, and then I kind of started reading comics again once I started discovering other things. But it was a definite, like, a turning point in my life when I actually was like, these are dumb, and I put them down, and I walked away from Marvel Comics and all comic books. I mean, I was like 13, 14, but the point is,
you were kind of
I was a kid. Yeah, I was a dumb kid, but the point is, I should have been the target age for Marvel. Like,
right, it just was unappealing on
everything. Exactly. And the X books were going through a lot of problems, and Marvel was doing their Heroes Reborn thing, where they tried to restart Captain America and Fantastic Four and Thor, and it just like bombed horribly. It was a mess. I mean, maybe there's some people out there that like them, but I'm pretty positive that the common consensus among everybody in the comic book industry was that, like, the 1995 to 2000 was possibly the darkest period in comic book history, except for the Frederick Wortham hearings in the 50s, when they actually instituted the Comics Code Authority. Maybe except for that, because that had such a profound lasting effect on the industry. But in terms of creativity, like modern mainstream comics, what Marvel and DC was doing was just at an absolute low. But this Deadpool book stood out among them. And I actually would say that this Deadpool issue is probably one of the best comics Marvel put out in that entire decade, in the 90s.
I mean, like, prior to this book, were many comics trying to do this whole funny, like, and not like, that seems almost too general, but like, were they trying to do what this book was doing prior to this book? Were there many comics trying to do that?
No, there were most books were like really. They didn't have a sense of humor. They were trying too hard to tell you how adult and serious business they were. And there were some writers that wrote jokes. There were some books that had jokes in them. Like Fabian Nicieza, I think I pronounced his name correctly. He was a writer for Marvel in the 90s. He co-creator of Deadpool, technically. Okay. He was writing New Mutants, I think, at the time when Deadpool was created, with Rob Liefeld. So Nicieza often gets the co-creator of Deadpool point. He writes jokes. He's a funny guy. Incidentally, if you ever meet Fabian at a comic book convention, when, like, I had the good fortune of meeting Fabian last year at a comic book convention, he was across from me. His table was across from my table, and it was great. So I got to hang out with Fabian a little bit. Very, very, like, funny guy. He is a talker. In fact, he's like exactly like Deadpool. Like, he just never shuts up.
Good.
And that's it. And it's like, not in a bad way. Like, in a good way. Like, he's a real talkative guy, and he's real, like, cheerful and happy. And I was like, this guy is so obviously the creator of Deadpool. Like, it's so obviously Deadpool.
That's pretty surreal. Because it's like when I know who Rob Liefeld is, I'm like, this guy made Deadpool? Like, I have, like, this, like, second look kind of thing. Well, and then when you tell me that, I'm like,
well, what's interesting is that I think you can look, like, Rob Liefeld's Deadpool is very different from Fabian's Deadpool, and different than the Deadpool that we know today. Liefeld's Deadpool was not really, like a comedy character. He was Liefeld, so he was badass and serious, and he had big guns and a sword, and he killed people, and he made dark. It was like the selling point of the character was he did make dark jokes while he would do all these like evil, despicable things, and he was crazy. But it was all like from the perspective of like an actual 13-year-old. Of like I don't know. I don't want to like turn this into a Liefeld bashing thing, because I actually do have some respect for the guy for the amount of crap he has to put up with.
It's true.
From people who, anyway, from fans. But although I can honestly say I'm not a fan of his work, but I read a lot of his comics as a kid. I gobbled them up. So that whatever. We're gonna leave that, and we're gonna leave that there. We'll save that for another podcast if we ever do a Rob Liefeld comic on the podcast, which I don't know if we will.
I mean, you'd really have to sell me on that one.
Yeah. So, anyway, so it's an interesting time that this book was put out.
Do you think it would have done? Do you think when it was put out was why it did so good? Like, do you think the time period it was put out in is a reason why it did so good?
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think that may have contributed to it. I honestly think, though, it was really just the strength of the creators. Like, it's a good book. Like, they were putting out a good book. But they were also putting out a good book at a time when, frankly, Marvel wasn't putting out too many good books. So, like, people who were fans of Spider-Man, but were not enjoying Spider-Man books, I think they could read Deadpool and enjoy it. Even though Deadpool is not...
In general, or this issue in
general. Like, the issues that they were coming out at the time. Like, if you were not a fan of this whole Clone Saga nonsense, you could probably read Deadpool and enjoy it instead.
Right.
Even though it's not exactly the same. Deadpool is definitely way more Looney Tunes comedy than Spider-Man is. But Spider-Man has always been more of a lighthearted book. Not strictly a comedy, but, you know, he's a funny character.
Yeah, comedic.
Yeah, he's a funny character.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I couldn't really say either way, but I do know that...
Because, like, I didn't know if it was like a, you know, did people look at this and know that it was going to be something, or did it kind of, like, look better by comparison?
Well, it was definitely, I can say it was it had a loyal cult readership, like a loyal fan following. The book was set to get canceled at one point during the series, and it was saved by a letter writing campaign from the fans who wrote in and said they didn't want it to be canceled. They all would keep buying it, and the book kept going for a while.
It's nice to see things like that work out.
Yeah, there's been a handful of books that keep going because of that. So yeah, this was a book that I don't think, maybe not a lot of people read this book, but it is very fondly remembered by
the ones who did.
Specific fans. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I'll remember it. This book was, I knew it was Deadpool. I knew what I was getting into, but I don't think I quite knew the gravity of what I was getting into.
Right.
So, you sold it to me as this really funny Deadpool issue, blah, blah, blah. I didn't really expect what I got. I'm glad that it was what it was. It exceeded my expectations, but yeah, so
it was good.
We just wanna,
before we get into it, I do want to clarify. As I said in the intro, the book was written by Joe Kelly, this was his first ongoing series, a comic book series, I believe. He started work at Marvel in the mid '90s, and I think he had written a few like one-off stuff, but Deadpool was his first big assignment. Okay. And he's basically been working in the industry ever since, like getting steady work from Marvel and DC. Interestingly enough, I can honestly say I actually haven't read a lot of Joe Kelly's works, but I am a huge fan of Joe Kelly just based off of the 2 series of his that I have read. One being his Deadpool run, and 2 being his 7-issue Image series called I Kill Giants, which I think is one of the best books ever put out, and we will be doing that book in a very near future episode of Comic DNA.
You've been talking about it quite a lot. I'm really excited for it.
So we are going to do that one. But it's weird because I actually, I've only read these 2 series by Joe Kelly, and I really, really like them, but I haven't really been interested in reading a lot of his other stuff, because most of his stuff is just Marvel and DC stuff. And
right.
I'm not, I don't expect it to be bad. It's just, it's really hard nowadays. It's really hard for me to get motivated to just read a Marvel or DC character without some kind of hook, and usually that hook has to be a creative team involved in the book, and the book has to not really be involved in whatever mega story arcs are going on in the series. And so,
or if we're doing it for this,
or if we're doing it for the podcast, right. I have to read it.
That's a pretty good, good motivation.
Yeah, and this issue in particular that we were reading was penciled by Pete Woods, who I'm actually not very familiar with. Pete Woods, I think this is the only thing I've read of his that he's drawn. Is he did I forget how many issues in Joe Kelly's run. Joe Kelly's the run started off with Ed McGuinness, who is kind of a big name artist. He's been working on tons of stuff, in comics. Right. You know what? Ed McGuinness did all those Red Hulk comics that you like so much.
Oh, yeah.
So this early Ed McGuinness work was on Deadpool. He was the first. He did probably the first 10 issues, and I think Pete Woods probably did this one and a few others, and then there were some other artists here and there, but
Pete Woods did a great job.
Yeah, Pete Woods.
I thought this book was very, very artistically well done.
Pete Woods definitely has, Pete Woods definitely has like an Ed Guinness. I would say like a mix between Ed Guinness and Joe Madureira. I know you haven't read anything by Joe Mad. Joe Mad is kind of I don't want to say a notorious figure in the industry, but Joe Mad started in comics in the 90s, and he got really huge really fast. He was drawing X-Men, and he had this really exaggerated style similar to what we're seeing in this book. And he also had his creator-owned series Battle Chasers. That's kind of I remember when that came out, and I was Joe Mad is notorious because he never finished it, and he basically kind of just quit the industry and left a lot of his stuff unfinished.
That's really unfortunate.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. He's since come back and done stuff here and there. Right. He's still I guess he's getting back into the industry, or he has been for the last few years. I haven't really read anything that he's done since coming back, but he did leave a lasting influence in the comic book industry because a lot of people started to emulate what he was doing. And I'm not specifically saying, I don't know if Pete Woods was specifically emulating Joe Mad. I'm just saying his style falls into that Ed McGuinness Joe Mad style of how he was drawing. And that also was definitely the Vogue style at the time that this book was put out, 1997. That's what a lot of comics look like.
Right.
So okay. Talked about Joe Kelly, talked about Pete Woods. Been talking about how funny and how special and perfect this issue is, so let's just get right into it.
Yep, let's jump right
Luke, why don't you tell me, as best as you can, what the plot of this comic is?
As best as I can, okay. Deadpool and his friend Blind Al, right? Yeah. Okay. They accidentally Deadpool's teleporter malfunctions, and they accidentally get thrown in the past. And the general plot is them trying to get back, and how utterly terrible it goes.
Right, yeah.
Just utterly abysmal. Every chance they have to get back messes up. They land on Aunt May. No, that's the thing.
Yes.
Coincidentally, they get tied up into a Spider-Man plot.
Right. And
I'll
go ahead and explain the high concept of this comic.
Thank you, because I tried.
That's fine. So the true genius of this issue is what happens is Deadpool and his prisoner Blind Al. Blind Al is a really interesting supporting character of Deadpool in the Deadpool series at the time. She's basically like his companion / prisoner. She's just an old blind lady that he keeps around to take care of him, but he also tortures her and keeps her prisoner.
Right.
They get accidentally sent to the past through this teleporter malfunction. In the previous issue, they were fighting some lame superheroes, and Deadpool was beating them all up, and he was going to teleport away from the battle, and then they also had a teleporter on their team, and like they crossed the streams or something to that effect. And and as a result, Deadpool and Blind Owl get teleported to the past. Now they never say when they're transported to. It's just left purposely up in the air. And the reason it's left up in the air is because of Marvel's sliding time frame, like time scale. Is that everything in Marvel comics is in Marvel continuity. So Marvel comics that were printed in Amazing Spider-Man number 1, 1964, is still in Spider-Man's continuity. And you think to yourself, well, it's been 40 years, 50 years since then. Why isn't Spider-Man 50 years old? And the reason is because they have a sliding time where it's 10 years have passed in the publishing history, but that's only 1 year inside the Marvel Universe. And you just kind of gloss over a lot of the inconsistencies. And you don't really have to think about it. Anyway, so the high concept for this issue is that Deadpool and Blind Owl get transported back to New York during the events of Amazing Spider-Man number 47. That is an issue where Kraven the Hunter is chasing Spider-Man, or actually Kraven the Hunter is going after Norman Osborn because he's looking for the Green Goblin, and Spider-Man gets involved, and Spider-Man fights Kraven, and that's the issue. So this is where the comic really shines. The reason this is such a genius comic is because what they actually did was they redid panels from the original issue with John Romita's art and Stan Lee's dialogue, and they cut up a lot of the panels and drew in Deadpool and Blind Owl and Deadpool's other flunky character, Weasel.
Yeah.
So what you have here is you have a mix of Pete Wood's art emulating John Romita's art. Whenever he draws the past pages, he's drawing it in John Romita's style. And if I'm not mistaken, Marvel actually have the past pages are actually inked by Al Milgrom and Joe Sinnott, who are old industry veterans who were inking John Romita. They were inking Marvel Comics at the time. So that's really what gives it that authentic feel, because
I didn't even notice it until, seeing two of the pages side by side, because I was really into it. I was laughing the whole time, blah, blah, blah. And I see these 2 pages side by side or something, and I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice the art style shift at first.
Right. So what happens is Deadpool's in the past, and he's drawn in the John Romita style. But it's not just drawn in the John Romita style. They also take pages from the original issue, and they edit them around. They redo all the dialogue to make it appropriate to the story as it's happening now that Deadpool is there. And they occasionally draw in, Aunt May, or I should say Blind Owl takes the place of Aunt May, because when they teleport into the past, they knock out Aunt May. And so Blind Owl is accidentally. And so Blind Owl is an old woman, so Deadpool forces her to take the place of Aunt May. So Al dresses up like Aunt May, so in any of the panels where they have Aunt May in the old comic, they just kind of fudge it a little bit to draw her to look a little bit more like Blind Owl with the glasses, because she's blind, so she wears these big old person's glasses. Right. And they draw Deadpool in place of Spider-Man, and they add Weasel into the story arc, because the storyline is, in order to get back to the present, Deadpool has to find Weasel to get him to fix the teleporter, because the teleporter's broken. And Weasel, at this point, in the past, quote, in the past, he is in high school, so he's just a high school nerd. And he goes to school with Peter Parker. And
he's trying to get a job
at Oscorp, which is the job that Peter Parker is up for. And so, needless to say, there is so much potential for comedy in this, because
what I was noticing, or what I was curious about, is you were saying, was it Spider-Man 47 or something?
Yes, Spider-Man issue number 47.
So I'm assuming there was a lot of similarities just from the art alone. Whenever he transforms into Peter Parker through his cloaking device or whatnot.
Yes. He has the
really
holographic
clever
image inducer.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, they draw him to look exactly the way John Romita draws him.
Okay.
Yeah. And I said, some of the pages, it's the original John Romita art, and then some of
That's what I was going to ask.
It's hard to tell in some places. Some of it is the original John Romita art, and some of it is new art. because they really did a perfect job of integrating the art.
Oh yeah, I mean, for me, from the outside, I wouldn't have even noticed.
Yeah, and I mean, like, they reprint the whole issue of Amazing Spider-Man in the back of the book, so you can kind of go through and look and see what's original and what's not, and you can compare it, and you can see the panels where they added things, and just how different it was. But yeah, like, there's, needless to say, there's a lot of comedy to be had by Deadpool messing around in this old Spider-Man comic.
Especially after Al says, don't do anything.
Right.
It's going to mess up the time stream. And
right. Which
Deadpool just...
That joke is so good. Like, she has to explain to Deadpool, oh, we can't change anything or else, we might never exist. And Deadpool's like, oh, okay, fine, whatever. I guess it's our responsibility to do everything in our power to protect the integrity of the future. And then immediately somebody shows up and he's just like, don't worry about it. I got it under control. And he's just going to kill him. And,
of course.
Yeah, and so...
Because, like, through the whole issue, it's funny because there's this, like, tiny underlying plot of, like, what are we going to do with Aunt May? We've got this lady blacked out in the back here.
And that joke is really good, too. And, like, Deadpool's just like, I took care of it. And they never explain what he did. And they you just kind of assume maybe he killed her. And then later on, it shows what happened to her, and she's unconscious on the couch, and she wakes up, and, like, a little, like, a makeshift monster made out of, like, clothes and, like, sticks, like, falls from the ceiling.
Makes her black
and just, like, scares her. Like, it falls down.
I audibly laughed so hard.
It's holding a sign that says boo, and it just, like, pops up, and she just faints again. Yeah. Oh, very funny.
That was hilarious. But it's like I was saying, I didn't know what I was getting into with this book, and there was so many times. It's been, the books we've read in this podcast have truly been, one in a million. They've just been stellar. It was nice having such a funny book to kind of like end the year on. It was so refreshing, and I haven't really like read a comic that I've just outright just could not handle how funny it was until this.
Yeah, that was my experience with this comic too, actually. Like I said, a lot of like mainstream comics are not that funny, and I kind of have a theory as to why, because there are lots of comics that are hilarious. I mean, comic strips. I mean, like, there's all kinds of hilarious comics, but like what Marvel and DC does is not hilarious comics. So very few of them, when they try to be funny, like it might be funny in your head, you read it and you're like, okay, that's a good joke. This comic really catches you by surprise, and it really achieves true comedy, because it really catches you by surprise and really makes you just laugh out loud. Like,
like the part with Aunt May stumbling across the monster. Deadpool's first encounter with Kraven. Whenever he prank calls Peter and tells him that there's a story going on, so that Spider-Man is not involved in this story.
That's such a good thing. I guess we should kind of explain for the story. Basically, so Deadpool and May and Al drop on May, and so Deadpool decides he has this holographic image inducer, so he takes a bunch of pictures of Peter Parker, because they're in her house. He has no idea who Peter Parker is, just some dorky kid. And he uses the holographic image inducer to take Peter's image and disguise himself as Peter Parker. So now he's walking around as Peter Parker. And then he tricks Peter Parker into going to New Jersey because he gives him a hot tip about some crime that's going to go down. So Peter Parker is going to go to New Jersey and take pictures of it. And then, of course, Peter Parker is like, little do they know, I'm also Spider-Man, so it won't just be a journalist in New Jersey taking care of this problem, it'll be Spider-Man. That is such a great joke, because it gets Spider-Man... that was a hell of a weird noise.
It's okay.
It's such a good joke, because it gets Spider-Man out of the book, and what I think makes this really funny is that you essentially put Deadpool into a Spider-Man comic, but like Spider-Man's not in it at all. Like, Deadpool takes the place of Spider-Man. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so they write out Spider-Man completely, and it's just Deadpool dealing with the Spider-Man supporting cast. So Deadpool goes to the high school to find Weasel because he wants Weasel to fix his teleporter.
So
and he's disguised as Peter Parker, and Weasel doesn't like Peter Parker because they're rivals. And Weasel's an even bigger nerd than Peter Parker, which that's kind of a thing. I don't want to go off on too many history of comics things, but that's kind of a thing too because when John Romita took over the book, Steve Ditko originally did Spider-Man for 30 some odd issues, I think. I'd have to double check that, and I'm not going to. Basically, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko created Spider-Man. And Asterix, although there are some people that claim actually Jack Kirby created Spider-Man, we're not even getting into that right now.
For the sake of this.
Stan Lee and Steve Ditko created Spider-Man, and they did it for most of the 60s. When John Romita took over, John Romita's art style, which kind of became the house style during the 70s, he definitely drew Peter Parker. Peter Parker suddenly became cool. Like, he was no longer, like, the awkward, weird geek the way Steve Ditko drew him. And Peter Parker, and Stan Lee liked that, because they wanted Peter Parker to keep growing up and, go to college and be this cool guy. So, when Steve Ditko was doing the book, he was this awkward, nerdy teenager. And when John Romita took over the book, John Romita made him cool. Like, he was, had all these hot girlfriends, Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane are in the book, and they're all, like, super attractive and also popular. Like, they're not just like side characters. Like, in school, they're popular characters. So suddenly Peter is hanging out with all these, like, popular characters. His best friend is Harry Osborn, who's, a super rich, spoiled kid.
I love how much, just a little side tangent too, I love how much Deadpool makes fun of the Osborn.
That's probably might be the best joke in the whole book. It's just
that, and one of my favorite lines, just segueing from the Osborns, of they keep gradually talking to Deadpool in 60s lingo.
Oh yes,
and Deadpool says, "Are you having a seizure? Speak English."
So that's the best comedy I think in this book, is sort of that fish out of water. You have characters from the 90s who are now in the 60s, even though
kind of like a culture shock.
The time is never specifically stated, but they definitely, you understand that it's the 60s. Like, they make reference to the fact that it's the 60s, and so all the characters, Harry Osborn and Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy, they are all talking and acting exactly the way Stan Lee wrote them. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, this actually would have been the 70s, not the 60s. But still, they are all acting and talking exactly the way Stan Lee was writing them. So the best comedy is this, like, really, really like commentary on the slang and the absurdity of how these characters were acting. So, you have Harry Osborn is just speaking with all this weird slang, and Deadpool doesn't understand him, and then keeps making fun of his hair, which is that joke.
Even, like, whenever Norman walks in, he goes, "Oh my God,
there's two of them." Yeah, and there's like a. Like, I think my favorite thing is the fact that Deadpool can't communicate with them because he doesn't understand their slang. So, Harry is like, "We got to get grooming," and he gives him a razor, and Deadpool assumes that Harry wants him to sharpen his hair, like, with the razor. That's one of the jokes. Deadpool's like, "Oh, you're never going to guess what's happening. Parker's roommate asked me to sharpen the point on his head." So, it's really funny, and I really love the way the scene where Blind Al meets Mary Jane, and Mary Jane is just, like, turns on the radio and starts dancing and is speaking with all this slang, and Al just assumes she's on crack. And, they totally treat Mary Jane like this, like, crazy drug addict spaz chick. And it's really funny because the way Stan Lee writes her, you could infer that. You could infer that this kid is messed up on something. The way she's using slang. She's loose. She's a loose crazy goose, I think is what Al calls her. Like,
yes,
it's funny. Good comedy.
That was one of the other moments. One of the many that I did just audibly laugh out loud. And I can't really say that I do that often when I'm reading comics. So, like I said, very refreshing.
Yeah. That's my favorite bit about this whole comic is definitely Deadpool having to deal with the supporting cast. And he goes to the Gwen Stacy's party, and it's just all of the way the characters are acting and talking in the way they were originally written by Stan Lee, except instead of Peter Parker standing there and having his own internal monologue of, oh my gosh, I'm Spider-Man, I gotta deal with all these things I gotta deal with, and I'm worried about Aunt May or whatever, the thought bubbles are all Deadpool going, these people are all crazy, I don't understand what they're saying.
Right, I don't understand what's happening.
Yeah.
And then, like, throughout the course of the story, they, like you were saying, Kraven is after Green Goblin.
Yes.
And it, through chain of events, ends up trying to go after Spider-Man, and then accidentally comes after Deadpool.
Right, yeah, well, because basically what happens is Deadpool, since he's Peter Parker, he's popular. Like, he's popular, he's hanging out with Harry and Gwen Stacy, and like, there's so many good jokes about Deadpool trying to pick up Gwen Stacy. Like,
oh my god, that was so amazing.
Try like hitting on her and stuff, and
he tries to hook Weasel up with the other one that he's not hitting. I think it's Mary Jane.
Yeah,
he tries to hook Weasel up with Mary Jane, and just to try to persuade him into fixing his teleporter. Because like you were saying, Weasel doesn't want anything to do with Peter Parker.
Right.
He doesn't even believe that he has a teleporter.
Exactly, yeah, because it's made up technology.
He tells him, right.
So in the course of the story, Deadpool is trying to get Weasel to work on his image inducer, but Weasel doesn't want to do it because Weasel hates Peter Parker. I'm sorry, the teleporter, yeah. And Weasel doesn't want to do it because Weasel hates Peter Parker, but then Deadpool, disguised as Peter Parker, convinces Gwen Stacy to let Weasel come to the big party she's having. So suddenly Weasel is completely awestruck because he's going to go to this great party with all these hot women, and there's probably
he even gets to
to dance with her, and like, at the end of the book when he's like, you've given me the greatest present a man could ever want, a chance to be within smelling distance of Gwen Stacy. I love Weasel,
and like after everything that happens, the only thing he's worried about is that he can't dance with Gwen Stacy
exactly
anymore.
Yeah,
all the Kraven stuff happens, and he is just devastated that he can't be.
He's a big creepy nerd. Weasel, they play that up really good. So they go to the party, and then Kraven shows up looking for Norman Osborn. So Kraven shows up to the party to kidnap Harry Osborn so that he'll draw Norman Osborn out so that he can then find the Green Goblin, because Kraven doesn't know that Norman is the Green Goblin. And so it's this convoluted thing. So there's so many jokes at the party. It's like we can't even just we can't just sit here and recite joke after joke after joke. But there are so many jokes. Yeah, and it's so funny. Just the way the art is seamlessly integrated with the new characters, with Weasel at the party. And Kraven shows up and disrupts the party, and I will say my other favorite joke is that Kraven shows up and they show the panel of Peter Parker running away to go change into Spider-Man, but they change the dialogue so that Deadpool says, "Eek, I'm out of here," and then the thought bubble is, no one will think twice if a wuss like Parker runs from a fight. So, it's the same thing. Deadpool's trying to get out of sight so he can change into Deadpool, which is what Parker is always doing, but comedy. Jokes.
Yeah. Parker's doing it in a legitimately serious context. Deadpool is doing what everyone would assume Peter Parker would do.
Exactly.
Like he was saying, no one would expect it. And he comes back as
Deadpool and gets into the fight with Kraven.
Speaking of the fight with Kraven, in the original Spider-Man issue, did Kraven have the nipple?
Yes, he did. That was the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
He shoots these lasers out of if you look at it, his costume has he's wearing that vest with the lion mask, and then the mane, goes over the back. These lasers shoot out of the eyes of the lion's face on the costume, but they're they're positioned right where his nipples would be on his big beefy chest.
Because the first thing I searched, I was searching to try to figure out one last plot element, and first thing that came up was Kraven nipple lasers ?
Right.
So I wanted to make sure that that was actually in the Spider-Man story too.
Yes, it was.
Because that was so hilariously out of context for me because I had read the original Spider-Man story, and I'm like, what is happening? I thought this was. I was like, is this a Deadpool thing?
Right. No, that's in the original comic. It's like a paralyzer ray that Kraven uses to stun. He does it just like when he fights Deadpool. Deadpool's beating him just like Spider-Man was beating him.
Pretty handily,
and then Deadpool. I do like the way they draw Deadpool in all the Spider-Man positions. So he's hanging onto a girder upside down, but then the dialogue bubble is he makes a reference to like he's holding onto these girders in a cool way to impress the babes,
right?
And like how his fingers hurt from like having to grip onto everything like that. But yeah, Kraven uses that to stun Deadpool and to knock him out. Now in the original Spider-Man story, Kraven does that and knocks out Spider-Man, and then Kraven gets to capture Norman Osborn, and then finally the ray wears off, and then Spider-Man has to choose between saving Norman Osborn and catching Kraven. And, obviously he chooses to save Norman Osborn. Deadpool, basically the same thing happens, except Deadpool recovers just a bit faster because he's got the healing factor. So they show a few extra panels of Deadpool beating up Kraven than Spider-Man did.
Right. Because it makes sense that Deadpool's able to take Kraven.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, Kraven drops Norman Osborn, and Deadpool, in the spirit of not messing up the timeline and having to keep things from, keep people from dying, he saves Norman Osborn, and then as a favor to him, Deadpool tells Norman Osborn a little secret about Weasel, who's applying for a job. And then
that he's an addict.
Yeah, that he's a drug addict or something. And so then when Weasel goes to talk to Norman about his job, Norman shuns him and tells him he's got to get help for his problems or whatever. And that's when Deadpool shows up as Peter Parker to give him a bunch of alcohol to just
to get him started,
to get him loaded so that he'll fix the teleporter.
Right,
and
it gets him started on the events of where Weasel is at.
Exactly, that leads him to being this because in the regular Deadpool book, Weasel is basically this like tech genius guy who he's a weasel, like he's a weaselly kind of guy, but he's really smart, so he just builds like super technology things for people who want it. And so Deadpool is always giving him money for like some snazzy weapon or some new whatever he needs. Weasel will build it.
I really liked the present timeline panels.
Mm-hmm.
I liked that they were there, but they weren't like overwhelming.
Yes.
Because I hadn't read the previous issue,
right?
Where he was fighting those lame heroes, like you were talking about. So I felt like this was self-contained enough to where it we could just read it by ourselves.
Yes, I think so too.
And I was still in the loop. I knew what was going on to a degree. I didn't know who the characters were, but I knew enough about them.
Yeah, we should
follow the story.
Should say that the intercut between the old story of Deadpool in this Spider-Man issue, they do keep cutting to the present day where they have I believe they are the Great Lake Avengers, and I know certain fans will know who that is. A lot of fans will have no idea who that is, but basically they're joke characters. They're just a bunch of lame superheroes, and that's why they were in a Deadpool book. But
of course,
they are trying to figure out how to get Deadpool and Blind Owl back into the present, and so they've got Weasel there, and that's like basically those pages are just exposition pages of Weasel kind of like figuring out what's going on, how to get messages back to the past through their teleporting character, a guy by the name of Doorman, who's basically just a big black hole. And that's how they went to the past, was they like got sucked into Doorman somehow. And so like
through some convoluted means.
And so Doorman's there's like a little bit of a ticking clock because like Doorman's going to die if they don't get him back out. So they have to figure out how to save Doorman, and so that's what like the Great Lakes Avengers are all obviously concerned about that. So that's sort of the motivation between like why they have to hurry up, and Deadpool has to hurry up and figure out how to get to the present day really soon, even though, when you start thinking about time and how that works, whatever, just don't think about it. So yeah, and there's a lot of good jokes even there, like with the Great Lakes Avengers. Specifically, the joke, I think here's a question for you. Do you think they did the character of Flatman, who's like Mr. Fantastic, except he's like flat?
Yes.
Do you think they did the Flatman might be secretly gay jokes? Do you think they overdid that?
It's weird because
it's a running gag.
Yes, it is a running gag almost any time he's in the panel. either someone's talking to him about it after he reveals or after he slips up.
Well, it's like it's the comedy comes from not from like he's like secretly gay. It's just like it's just a bunch of stereotypes of like the character might be gay and he doesn't realize it. Like he
went to fashion
school.
He's like, I know the difference between something and a stiletto. What's the big deal?
That's no big deal about that.
I think if they would have had more future scenes, it would have really worn down on me. But I feel like since they did just enough of them, it kind of was like a passing glance. I laughed at it. When it came back up again, I was like, oh, I get it.
Yeah, it was...
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was okay. Balance. I think it worked out. It just, that was...
Yeah. And, the first time it happened, I laughed my head off.
Yeah. When he's talking about the shoe, like, he recognized... Yeah. Like, oh, they had designers back then. Yeah.
Yeah, that was just hilarious. Yeah. Especially because, like, aside from the flatness, like, he was, he had that Mr. Fantastic, like, well-rounded look.
Yeah. Like, he looks like a... He looks like a straight guy. Like, and I don't mean straight like in his sexual orientation. I just mean like he looks like Mr. Fantastic, like a nerd haircut and a big jaw. Yeah, and so he looks like a square, not a hepcat.
He actually looks like
a rectangle. Anyway.
Yes. Boom.
Bum, 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 bum. But yeah,
I thought that was a very good balance. Especially since there wasn't that many future or present day scenes.
Yeah.
So by the time the present day scenes were happening and like we're done with I already kind of forgot about it. So it was really well done.
Yeah.
I like the doorman stuff, like how much Weasel didn't want to just stick his hands in the guy's body.
All the jokes about how gross it was, like
right, and how he puked. Whenever they came back.
What is he? Does he make the Sanford and Son joke where he's like, "Oh, it's the big one"? Like
I think he does. Like,
it's
he either does that or makes a joke about like how unbelievably sick he feels.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of indicating that they're coming.
Yeah,
back.
He's gonna throw up. He's like, I feel like I'm gonna.
But it's funny that like they didn't even waste any time like really, really trying to go in depth on how they were stuck there or how they came back. It was just you
know what? Actually, that was like a little like plot device joke that I really liked. Was like Flatman is the scientist of the group, so Flatman and Weasel are like working on figuring all this out, and Flatman, when he starts explaining it, like the science, he's like, oh, it's when one takes into the moment to mediate when you start thinking about the coronal ripple and the blah 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 blah, and the dialogue bubble just goes blah 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 blah, and all the characters just go right, whatever, and like there's a good moment where one of the other characters, I think Mr. Immortal, like Flatman is explaining it, and he's just going blah blah blah, and Mr. Immortal is going yes, that makes sense, and Weasel's like, you have no idea what he's talking about. Don't even pretend.
I laughed really hard.
Yeah. Don't pretend that you know what he's talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's true. The writers didn't like try to actually trick us into thinking they know
exactly. You don't have to, because it's just a plot device for the comedy.
It works in the context of the story so well because it's already so goofy and over the top. Like, even just starting the book, I just flipped to the first page. In the issue you handed me, it was the poster for Forrest Gump, but with Deadpool
I love that.
I lost
That's the credits page.
I was like, what am I getting into? This is
Deadpool
hilarious.
Wearing the white suit sitting on the bench, and it's got Forrest Gump text, with great power comes great coincidence.
Yeah, because when I looked it up, I think that's what the issue's actually like called. Quote unquote.
No, that's the title of this issue. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah.
So
this book.
I maintain that it's the funniest issue of Deadpool ever created, and there have been funny issues of Deadpool. I do like Deadpool. I've actually got a lot of Deadpool comics. I stopped reading him a few years ago. Basically, I don't want to sound like too much of a hipster, but basically Deadpool got like really, really popular, and that was like right when I stopped reading him, because
pretty much as soon as he got a voice actor, he really kind of blew up.
Yeah.
Like Nolan North was a very prolific voice actor for the role of Deadpool. He did like Nathan Drake in the Uncharted series, but Deadpool, everyone knew Nolan North's voice from Deadpool because he had that twang every time he like said something. His voice went an octave higher, and it was funny. Like we hadn't really seen something like that to the people who hadn't read Deadpool,
right.
like myself. That was my first exposure to him, was the other media, the animated stuff, the video games, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, this character's goofy and stupid. That's funny. My age when I found him was whenever, for you, when Deadpool was first starting to become popular.
Right, so yeah.
I picked it up just a generation later. So, but in a different media. Like I was saying, I like a specific Deadpool. Ironically enough, it wasn't the Deadpool I grew up with. I found out about the Deadpool I liked after the fact.
Yeah. They ran this Deadpool series until about 2002, 2003, I think.
Okay.
It ran for 69 issues, which is a good issue to end Deadpool on, I suppose.
Of course. I wonder if that was intentional.
Well, it was.
I'm sure they got a chuckle.
Well, I'm sure they got a chuckle out of it. I can tell you it wasn't necessarily intentional, but I'm sure they went with it once they realized that's where they were. Because basically what happened is, just getting into a little bit more comics history for y'all.
Oh God.
What happened was Marvel canceled 3 series at the time. That would have been Deadpool, Cable, and X-Force. And I can't remember exactly why. There was a lot of conspiracy talk about them canceling those 3 series, because those were the 3 series that were
the Image guys worked on.
Specifically, no, just Rob Liefeld. Rob Liefeld created Cable and Deadpool in X-Force.
Right.
And so there might have been some goings on. I don't really remember, and I don't really care. So what happened was they didn't cancel the books and kill off the characters. Well, in Deadpool's case, they did, but what they did was they canceled the books and then restarted them with new names. So X-Force became X-Statix. This would have been right in the middle of Mike Allred, as we talked about in iZombie, the artist from iZombie, Mike Allred and Peter Milligan's run, which is a really good run, and we'll probably read some of those issues for a episode of a podcast. No problem. And then Cable became Soldier X, and Deadpool became Agent X. And in my opinion, it was a bad idea. Gail Simone was writing Deadpool at the time, and she was actually having a pretty good run. And then it got really weird because the book... Basically what happened was Deadpool died, and this new character that had amnesia, who called himself Agent X, and who looked and acted and sounded exactly like Deadpool, showed up. And so the book became about him, and everybody just assumed he was Deadpool. Even the characters in the book thought he was Deadpool. But, he was just a dude with amnesia. And then eventually, after a year of doing that, or it was more like a year and a half, closer to 2 years probably, they brought... Jeez. Yeah, well, I think it went 15 issues. So... Okay. Gail wrote 7 issues of Agent X, something like that, 6 or 7, and they were as good as her Deadpool run. And then there was a creative differences, and she left the book, and they just had some filler, and it was pretty mediocre to terrible. And then Gail came back and wrote this a story arc where she brought Deadpool back, and then they canceled the book, and then shortly thereafter they started the new book, Cable and Deadpool. They canceled Cable and Deadpool. There was this weird middle ground where, for some reason, Marvel didn't want to have a Cable book or a Deadpool book or an X-Force book, so they were all canceled. Then they brought the characters Cable and Deadpool back in a single book, Cable and Deadpool, which was written by Fabian Nicieza. They brought him back, and he did that whole run almost, I think.
A lot of people that I know that are big fans of Deadpool, that's what they cite as making them fans of Deadpool, was the Cable
That
Deadpool
was a good
run.
Series. I did really like that one, too. I don't...
And you said Fabian wrote
Fabian wrote the whole series, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. We can do a podcast about it. It's overall, it's good. I don't know if I like it as much as Joe Kelly's, but it's a little different, but it's good. And then Cable Deadpool ended... I don't know how many issues they did of that, maybe 40 or 50. And then when that ended, that's when they started doing multiple Deadpool series just all over the place. Right,
because he kind of hit.
Yeah, that's when he got really popular, and that's when I stopped reading him. Because frankly, I just wasn't that interested in
for me, it turned into something I didn't really care about.
Exactly.
Like, I knew it was there. Mm-hmm. My friend was really into it. I read it, and that wasn't the Deadpool I really wanted to read.
And that was also a time when I was really cutting back on the amount of comics I was reading, because I was starting to try and make my own comics, and that really just monopolized all my time and money, so I just didn't have time to keep collecting comics. Much to the disappointment of my local comic book store, I'm sure. They lost a lot of money from me when I stopped buying regular Wednesday comics. I feel bad, but that's neither here nor there. So, yeah, this Deadpool comic, really excellent comic. I'm not sure if it's been reprinted. I assume there has to be some Deadpool reprints maybe somewhere, but I know for a long time this series was not reprinted because like I said, it wasn't really popular. It just had a strong cult following. So if you're a fan of Deadpool, if you're just a fan of comedy, or even if you're a fan of Spider-Man, any three of those things, I would really, really recommend you find this issue and read it, Deadpool number 11, because
it's got a little bit of something for
everyone. Is. It's really funny, but it's also really it's bold comedy, and they do something different. It's not like a standard funny comic. It's not. It's kind of its own story. The whole making fun of the old Spider-Man comic is a huge draw, obviously.
Right.
It's really, really good. It's absolutely one of my hands down single favorite issues of anything ever put out. I really love this book, and I think it's one of the funniest comics I've ever read.
There were so many things in this that I would really like to see more of. Not necessarily this exact specific things, but a book just trying to be funny as well as this.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult without just straight ripping it off. It did something really special.
Yeah, this was special. It's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
It was really special.
It was a parody of a Spider-Man book, which was hilarious. And it couldn't have fit better if it was, since it was Deadpool.
Yeah.
If it would have been anyone else, it would have been funny. The stuff would have been fine. But knowing what I know about Deadpool, having him in this context, made it that much funnier. Just added that extra layer of comedy to it.
Well, it's also really funny. I think we didn't really mention this, but it's also really there's a layer of comedy here, because Deadpool, one of the biggest criticisms levied against Deadpool, especially at the time of this book, was that Deadpool was just a rip-off Spider-Man character. I mean, his costume is basically very similar to Spider-Man's. It's red and black/blue. It's red and black, but depending on how you draw it, you got those blue highlights on there. And he's got the big Spider-Man eyes, just with slight variations, So Deadpool really got the whole, the biggest criticism was that Deadpool was just a rip-off of Spider-Man. He's just a zanier, wackier version of Spider-Man. But Spider-Man was already doing the superhero making jokes, cracking wise while he's beating up people.
Right. He's just
exactly, yeah. But Deadpool takes it to the next level, quote-unquote. And a lot of people they wrote him off as just being, there's nothing original there. It's a novelty, exactly. So this issue really
proves that he wasn't just a novelty.
Well, not just that, but it really plays with the whole rip-off Spider-Man, he's a rip-off Spider-Man, by literally just putting him in a Spider-Man book and just having him take the place of Spider-Man. Yeah.
Right. So it's you think he's a rip-off Spider-Man?
Yeah, and now he is, and it's the funniest thing ever.
It truly was. Like I said, it's something special. I will be hard-pressed to find a book as funny as this.
No, I agree. It's fantastic, and
I'm really, really glad we got to read this one. It was a really good way to wrap this into the year.
Yeah.
These 10 episodes of Comic DNA.
Yeah, so I think
that was Deadpool issue 11. I think we pretty much hit all the notes for the most part. All I have written down at least.
Yeah, definitely. So, thank you for listening to us talk about Deadpool for an hour.
Thank you for listening to us talk about comics for 10 episodes.
Yes, 10 episodes. We're recording this. This is the end of December. We'll put it up on our website in a few weeks. So it'll probably be a few weeks into January when this episode.
First or second week of January.
Yeah, probably the second week, I think.
Yeah.
Or maybe even the third week, now that I think about it. No, second week. It'll be the second week.
Yeah.
So next week, not next week, the next episode, we are going to do Sam and Max.
Surfing the Highway.
Surfing the Highway. That's a collection of the Sam and Max comics that were put out in the 80s. I think it's mostly 80s, maybe into the 90s.
Yep.
Written and drawn by Steve Purcell. And we are going to have a guest on that episode, correct? Yes.
Yes, that will be a relative of mine, Anthony Comito. He is the one who sold me on this book, convinced me to read this book. And I've been a big Sam and Max fan for quite a while. I'm really into the Telltale games that they've done. And the second I just got an opportunity to talk about Sam and Max, I was already sold on the idea. Didn't know much about the book itself, but yes, we will be doing Sam and Max, Surfing the Highway with my relative Anthony Comito. This will be the first book of Comic DNA that has been on my end.
Yes, I was actually...
Everything has been from you.
Yeah, I was going to actually mention that kind of... We didn't do this... This isn't necessarily by design, but the way this podcast has essentially been working is that I pick out a book off of my shelf. I have a large comic book library. Probably not the biggest, and it's definitely not all-encompassing, but I do have a lot of comics, and I do like a lot of comics. So, when Luke and I started this podcast, we were kind of approaching it from the angle that I know a lot about comics, or at least a lot about books that I really like, and I'm without sounding a little too hipstery or arrogant about it, I'm a bit more of a discerning critic than a lot of people I know. And Luke is somebody who's not really read a lot of comics.
I read more the things surrounding it. Like
you're part of the generation that has really come to know a lot of these franchises through the other media, through movies and games.
I've been getting into comics.
Yeah, exactly. So you've recently been getting into comics. So part of the whole angle here is that I'll find a really good book and we will read it. And I come at it from the perspective of somebody who is a big fan of it or who really likes what it represents for the comic book industry or the history about it. And Luke comes at it from the perspective of somebody who is just fresh eyes, who's totally ignorant of it, and not ignorant in an insulting way, just ignorant in a you just literally don't know anything about it kind of a way.
Yep.
And I think that has been working out pretty well for us. I think
it's a good way. It's a good contrast of you are looking at it as a creator as well, and I am looking at it, like you said, blind. I'm ignorant to it, and it's just trying to illustrate that these works are so good.
Yes.
You can easily just pick up on it, no matter what your background.
Yeah, and that is kind of how I want to come at. When I want to talk about these books, I do want to talk about it kind of from the perspective of somebody who does create comics and is looking at it from that perspective of more than just like the reading experience, but also the behind the scenes experience of how the book was made and what went into some of the specifics. I don't always do it because I don't, I'm not like perfect at everything or anything like that, but that is definitely the perspective that I naturally bring that perspective, whether I'm trying or not.
Yes.
And so I guess we'll go ahead and talk about a few changes or a few things that we're going to be doing in this coming year. This is the end of 2014, and we're getting ready to go into 2015. We are going to start having more guests on the show. Quite a few. If everything goes according to plan, maybe it'll all fall apart and everybody will hate us. But I have been talking to a lot of other independent comic book creators, friends of mine, people that I know, people that I've met at comic book conventions, and we want to start having more writers and artists on the show and talking about books that they like or books that inspired them. And so I've been in touch with about a dozen people, and we're going to start doing more episodes with more guests, and we are also going to do more episodes in a month. Up until this point...
3 instead of 2.
Yeah, we're going to do 3 or 4, kind of depending on how it goes. Basically, up until this point, we've just been doing every other week. And what we're going to do now is we're going to do sort of weekly. We're just going to take 1 week off at the end of the month. So the last week in the month is going to be a dead week. We're not going to do a new episode. I would love to do it weekly, but my time I can't read a new book every week and get it edited for the show with all the other work that I'm doing. I am still trying to write and draw comics, and then also my own regular recreational reading and my day job. And but we are going to start doing more episodes because I do enjoy talking about comics quite a bit. If you've ever met me at a convention, you may have heard me say that I really hate talking about the comics that I make, but I could talk for years about the comics that I like to read.
Comics you like.
Yeah, so I do really enjoy doing this podcast, so we're going to do more of it, and we're going to have more guests. But Sam and Max, which we are doing in the next episode, is the first book that is not coming off of my shelf. And I am familiar with Sam and Max. I read some of it when it came back as a webcomic a few years back, like 2005, like 10 years ago at this point, I think. But I never played any of the games, and I somehow completely missed the animated series in the late 90s that they did for it. I never saw that. But I do like it. I like the style, and it's funny. So we're going to be doing that for the next episode, and that's going to be the first episode that I am really, like, I haven't read the book that we're reading, so it's the first one that I'm coming in with, like, sort of a virgin perspective on Sam and Max.
Yes.
So we'll see how that goes. That'll be pretty interesting.
I think it'll be good.
I mean, it's a good book. Like, I know that.
Yeah, I'm very excited about the book. I think it's very, very well done. I love Sam and Max, so I'm excited to hear why you love it, or why you like it.
Indeed. So, yeah. So, thank you, everybody, for listening. As always, I am Aaron Walther, and you can find the comics that I have written and some that I've sort of drawn at my website, newhavencomics.com. You can find new episodes of this podcast they will be listed at newhavencomics.com. You can also find them at comicdna.podbean.com. That's where we're hosting all of these episodes right now. You can find me on Facebook, Aaron Walther on Facebook. New Haven Comics is also on Facebook. And you can find me on Twitter, AAWALTHER, you understand, at AA Walther, Twitter.
Yes, and I am still only on Facebook, Luke Moritz, so on and so forth. So yeah, if you like what we're doing, let us know. We're always open to suggestions. We always like to add more books to our list, our very large growing list.
Yes. So, and if you happen to know a comic book creator that you want to see on the show, tell them to be on the show. Just tell them to contact me. And I know that probably won't happen because it's a pain in the butt trying to coordinate people's schedules and whatnot. But if you really I'm advising you to harass people to be on our Rinky Dink show.
Yes, and thank you for listening up until this point.
You made it to this far. You really, really like this show, I guess.
Yes, apparently. It keeps giving us motivation to do it. Apparently you guys like what we have to say. So, thanks again.
We will see you all next episode.
See you all next year.
Well, by the time they listen to this, it already is next year, but
whatever. See you all
in the future.
Oh.
Dr. Neptune away!